actually sign up for the event. Because if you don't, you do not get the correct Zoom link. So I do apologize for being a little late. We did not expect this in the dry run through earlier today. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I see we got people from all over, and I would like to tell you, how many of you actually got to watch Slay the Dragon? Okay, because all of you, when you sign up, you should have gotten a free link to the movie, which is you can see it on Hulu now, but to the documentary. And so if you didn't get a free link, please let us know in the chat, and we'll make sure to get you a free ticket. The reason I'm asking is because this is how I found actually Katie. And then once I saw this documentary, like during the throes of the pandemic, I was busy watching documentaries, and I saw this one called Slay the Dragon, and it came up under political, and I thought, oh, okay, I have to tell you, I was very disheartened by what's been going on in our country for a very long time. And when I saw this documentary, it gave me hope, and I fell in love with Katie. I never met her. I didn't know anything about redistricting. I didn't know all of what was going on in Michigan, but I saw this documentary and I had to find her. And after, I'm not that bad at Google. I found her, and she was running an organization called The People. And that's how I got here. Since maybe last December. Okay. And it has been a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I'm so glad, for those of you that this might be your first event with The People, I'm so glad you're here. I hope you will continue to come to our events and get more involved in our organization. Having said all that, our executive director, in my opinion, is the person to learn all about redistricting, because Katie is, she was the lady that sent out an email, or no, a Facebook tweet, not a tweet, Twitter's tweet, whatever you do on Facebook, okay? And she wound up ginning up all the support in Michigan to actually get it wasn't a law, it was a ballot initiative, and then from that the law got passed. I know she'll tell you more about this, but basically this is the first year they got a citizens commission on redistricting into law, and this is the first redistricting that they're actually using it. So it's all exciting. I'm sure it's exciting for me. I'm really sure it's exciting for Katie. So this is who Katie is, and who will be interviewing Katie, along with any of you who've got questions. And I don't know if they mentioned to throw your questions into the chat, and we will get to them at the end of the program. Karen Lauert is a fellow House of Delegates member. I just got elected to the House of Delegates, which is when you've been volunteering, you can, I don't know if they ask you, you can nominate yourself to be on the House of Delegates, which is an infrastructure of the people. Karen's from California, I'm from Rhode Island, and we've gotten to be really good friends. Karen, say hello.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. We're really happy that you're here.
All right. So does everybody know how to use the chat and put questions in the chat as Katie is going through the presentation? It's going to be very interactive, and at one point during the presentation, everybody should. She's going to show you basically how redistricting works using a map and everything. So I haven't seen it yet. I'm very excited about that. And I think since I was a little bit late and you kind of, I think, did some of the other stuff, let's move forward. Karen, the show is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Elena. Appreciate it. Well, we're very excited about this evening, and we know that, like Elena mentioned, hope that you all learn a lot about redistricting. I didn't know much about it at all, and I'm glad that Elena and I got together for this project because it really opened my eyes to what is going on. So with that said, this will be an interview format. I'll be interviewing Katie and asking her a variety of questions. And like Elena said, go ahead and put your questions in the chat so we can get to them once the interview session is over. So the first question that I wanted to ask you, Katie, is, do you think the framers of the Constitution considered the possibility of gerrymandering when they gave the states the responsibility to draw district lines every 10 years when the census is completed?
Awesome. Thanks, Karen. And so excited to see everybody tonight. I actually have a couple slides that I'll start sharing that will go over kind of the history of gerrymandering too. So we'll make sure that we get to that question. Let me just pop it up really quick. Can everybody see my screen? Just a thumbs up will show me that you can. Fantastic. All right. I do think the framers were thinking a decent amount about redistricting, although I don't know that they were thinking necessarily about redistricting and the advances in technology that would come with how much data you know on every single person who lives in this country. So as I think everybody knows, we live in a democratic republic. Our country purposely chose to have the type of government where we elect a representative who is responsible for making sure that our voice is heard and that that representative is accountable to us. That means, though, we have to figure out which groups of voters get to vote for the same representative. So Elena lives in Rhode Island, I live in Michigan. We vote for different people to represent us in Congress. But even in Michigan, you know, my parents live about 2 hours away from me in the Detroit area. I live in Grand Rapids, opposite sides of the state. We have different people who represent us in Congress because of our state population. So that's really kind of the starting foundation of redistricting. So the lines that we'll mostly be talking about tonight are really going to be representatives. Now, a bunch of different things, the lines change every now and then. County government can, school districts, how judges are elected, those circuit court districts, all of those change. They all go through a redistricting process. But for tonight, we're going to mostly be focusing on the people who represent you in Washington, D.C. on the House of Representatives side. If your state has more than one congressional member, if yours doesn't, then you can ignore that part, but also in your state. So every state has three branches of government, but usually has a state house and a state senate. Sometimes they're called an assembly or an upper house and a lower house, but those lines also represent multiple people and they're part of the redistricting process. Now, the reason the Senate, the federal Senate, isn't included is because those lines are our state boundaries. Every single state has 2 senators. They get elected at large, meaning that everybody goes and votes for the same people. Those people are responsible for representing the entire state's interests, not just one portion of the state. When it comes to the House of Representatives, you're really looking at how can we represent, you know, this part of the state, the communities that are there. All right, so I hope that was clear, but if not, again, feel free to throw something in the chat. But for tonight, we're talking about congressional, and then in your own state, I just use Michigan as an example because that's where I live, the state house and the state senate. So my little arrows are to indicate that, like, no matter where in Michigan you are, you have somebody who's going to our state capital and Lansing representing you. All right, so then what else does the federal government say about redistricting? For the most part, they basically say, like, hey, the state can figure it out, but there's a couple rules that we're going to follow. Basically, these lines change once every 10 years after the census. Who here filled out the census last year or this year? I hope everybody, because your state gets federal funding and local funding based on it. But after that census happens and we have a new understanding of where people live across the country, then these lines can be redrawn. So the federal constitution says, you know, you have to use the census data every 10 years to draw these. And then there are also guidelines that roughly each House of Representative member needs to represent about the same number of people. So there's a fixed number of House of Representative members, and they want to make sure that, like, one congressperson in Michigan isn't representing 3 million people, while one in Rhode Island is representing 2 million or something like that, trying to keep it roughly the same. And then the last thing that's kind of federally mandated is you have to follow the Voting Rights Act, meaning you can't look at somebody's skin color or where their heritage is from and say, I'm going to try and make sure that you get less representation than I do. racial gerrymandering, and we'll get to what that means in a second, but that is illegal based on our federal laws. Now, the census just happened, as I had said, and that might mean that the number of congressional members your state has changed. So in this map, any of the states that are green, dark green gained 2 seats. They got 2 more representatives for the next 10 years. If it's a lighter green, they got 1. If it's gray, which is the majority of states, there was no change. And then if it's yellow, like Michigan is in yellow, you actually lost a seat. This might not mean that your state population didn't, like in Michigan, our state population actually went up over the last 10 years, but not as fast as other states. So other states, all the ones in green, those states over the last 10 years have really been growing. The population's been growing. You know, one of the big stories coming out of this is that California, for the first time, lost a seat, meaning the population growth in that place is just not being as quick. So this, again, is for kind of your congressional lines. In most states, your number of state house and state senate seats remains the same. In Michigan, it's like 33 senators and 110 state house members. But again, the lines change, but the total number stays the same. That's written in our state constitution. If you're bored, which or just interested, you can always go and look up your own state constitution, and it will probably say how many state house and senate seats are required. Great, so now that we're there, and I've got a little bit more history, Karen, before I get to your first question. The things that when you're learning about redistricting that you want to pay attention to on whether these lines that basically build up the most basic building block of our democracy that decide who you get to vote for and who technically should be thinking about you, where you live, your city, your community, while they're representing you in your state capital or in Washington, D.C. When these lines are being drawn, who draws those lines and who says, okay, yep, these are the right communities that should be together. Here's the right amount of population that should be here. Who draws those lines is really important. And I'll get more into that a little bit later. Also, what criteria you use. So there's those basic ones provided by the federal government, roughly equal numbers of people in every single district. You can't draw these lines based on race, and you need to make sure that they're drawn with the census data. You know, beyond that, individual states decide what are the other rules for what it means to build representation. And then what is the actual process followed? And that can be everything from what data is allowed to be used or isn't allowed to be used. It could be whether representatives, if they're the ones who are drawing the lines, let you in the room to know what's happening. You can actually have a process where the folks who are drawing the lines are required to travel across the state and actually ask different community members, you know, how has representation looked over the past 10 years? What would you change looking into the future? But really, if you can kind of keep this in the back of your mind, who's drawing the lines? How are they drawing the lines? What kind of criteria are they using? And then what does the process look like? Those will be the key pieces. And really, over the history of redistricting, so again, one of the biggest deals when our country was being founded was that we were going to be a democratic republic. We were going to have 3 branches of government. We were going to be able to elect the president together across the country. And then we had the Senate, which allowed for all states to make sure they had an equal voice. Yet in Congress, we had a representative democracy where people would be electing their representatives. And in the very beginning of the country, it was kind of like we were adding states all the time. And just for some context, I'm not an expert. I just know, you know, I definitely know the highlights. But for some of your questions, I will do my best, or I'll point you where they can tell you. But basically in the 1800s, it was like new states being added. Let's kind of keep roughly the same number of representatives for each state. And we'll let the states decide how they draw the lines and then make sure that they just send people to the Capitol. And then in the 1870s, that's when there was a state that tried to do something kind of funky where they had a voting district that wasn't actually touching same parts of the state. So because they were looking at how can we give ourselves the biggest advantage when drawing this line, it wasn't contiguous, meaning like the line was actually 2 different circles instead of one connected voting district. And the government was kind of like, nope, that seems fishy. it's very hard to see how you would actually be trying to be true to being representative. You can't even go from one part of your district to the other without crossing through other districts. So that's not allowed. But then really, up until the 1960s, not a lot changed. Some states actually didn't even really change the lines in between decades. They just kind of kept what they had. But in the 1960s, there was kind of like the redistricting reform revolution, where more rules were established, where they really started saying, you know what, it's not fair if these districts aren't the same sizes. That our government is founded on Democratic Republic lines. We want to make sure that, one vote in Michigan is the same as in Pennsylvania, is the same as in Florida, is the same as South Dakota. And so we really need these representatives to be representing roughly the same number of people. And then also the Voting Rights Act was made later in the 1960s that said, you cannot discriminate based on race, who is included or isn't included. Once Black men were vote in this country, gerrymandering, or these districts started to be drawn to make sure that where those folks lived had less representation than where white or land-owning men lived. And that was a very big deal. And they had seen that that was causing a lot of issues, and again, making it so that the principles that our country was founded on, that we really could have a country that was being ruled by the people of the country, that definition needed to be changed and expanded. And then there comes gerrymandering, which is very related to that. And this is the part, Karen, that back to your question about how much were, the founders really thinking about this. This is where I think they were much more concerned about how do we get the branches of government correct, and how do we make sure that we can have a thoughtful process that allows people to elect a representative. I think this is where maybe they didn't envision how bad it could get. So Elbridge Gerry, he actually served as vice president. He signed the Declaration of Independence as well as our Constitution. But what he's most well known for is his namesake, gerrymandering. He served as governor of Massachusetts between 1810 and 1812. And basically, people had been looking at these districts, and because the who were drawing the lines were the actual people who had already been elected, they were looking and seeing, like, how can I make sure my party is going to continue to win these seats? And they started to see, we kind of, the people who vote in the North are kind of voting the same as the people who are voting in the East. So even though maybe geographically it doesn't make sense, you can't travel easily to this part of the state from that part of the state, maybe we include them in this district so that we can make sure our party is going to win. And they started getting more and more strategic with drawing those lines. And the Boston Gazette, which was a newspaper at the time, called out that map drawing. And if you look at the image on the right of the screen, there's this crazy little vulture-looking creature. The newspaper said that it was winding so many times that it looked like a salamander. And then because Elbridge Gerry's name was Elbridge Gerry, they decided to call it a gerrymander because his party and ultimately he approved these maps. And they were calling out the hypocrisy that, we're this country that's fought so hard to have representative democracy, to make it so that people can elect representatives and hold them accountable. And yet look at this monster. They literally said, like, this monster that's a threat to our democracy. And just as a reminder, if you want to mute in between, I think we're getting some feedback from folks. So anyways, that's where we get the name gerrymandering. And basically gerrymandering means, if there's a political party or an individual politician who, when they're looking at drawing these lines that are going to determine our representation, they are more worried about how can they make sure that their party gets elected, or how can they make sure that they personally get elected, instead of the other party. And instead of drawing these lines to just try and make sure that they're actually representative and that people in those communities have similar interests can be represented in the state capitol and in Washington, D.C. So that's where the term gerrymandering comes from. And the last thing I will just say is that the other thing that I don't think the founding fathers probably thought of is now gerrymandering has gotten so bad because there's so much data on each of us and all of that data can be bought by political consultants. I'm sure all of you saw plenty of ads during the 2020 election, whether it was for a congressional member, whether it was for the president. And some of them might have been tailored specifically to you and your likes and your interests and what you think about, or probably what party you vote for. And all of that information is used right now, including information based on where do they think people are going to move. So obviously we don't all only move once every 10 years. There are trends to see, oh, okay, the city of, I'm going to use Michigan again because that's where I live. City of Michigan is growing. The city of Detroit is losing population over the next 10 years. That's probably going to continue. So they can have models of that data and where people are going to move, where different generations might move. And they draw these lines to try and think about, okay, so for the next 10 years, how can we guarantee our party is going to win by looking at all of that data? Not again to think about how can we get the best representation, how can we make sure people can have their voices heard, but purely thinking about how do we guarantee somebody's going to be able. So that was a very long answer to your question, Karen, but I think that's kind of where my position is.
No, thank you very much. It was important that we all learn the history about all of this redistricting and gerrymandering, which is very interesting about how the name came about, for sure. The salamander. It did look pretty scary. I do have another question for you, though. Since this is the first time Michigan is using the Citizens Commission for Redistricting, which you and thousands of volunteers worked so hard to put in place, how do you think it's working out now?
Yeah. So I can skip forward a little bit, but basically going back to that criteria I was talking about, in Michigan, we decided to change this. So the Facebook post that Elena was mentioning, in Michigan, we have the citizen-led ballot initiative process. I just saw we had somebody from Virginia. And Virginia, although they don't have the citizen-led ballot initiative process, their Democrat and Republican Party actually worked together to try and pass something that. So going back to that, I'll share my screen again. Actually, I'll go back to that slide. There we go. Oops, that was the wrong kind of share. Not there. Going back to that slide, when you're thinking about redistricting, who draws the lines is probably one of the first things that comes into mind, because politicians who are in office getting to decide who their voters are, like literally the people who are elected right now are deciding what voters are going to be lumped together for the next 10 years. That is a huge conflict of interest. Politicians will look at, hey, do I know the person, am I worried about the person who's running against me, even if they're in their same political party? So let's say I'm a Republican, and in the primary, I'm worried about my neighbors as a Republican because they seem to be getting popular and they might win. They will look up where their house is and draw the district lines, removing their other person's house so they have to now run in a new. They're doing that right now. I mean, it's ridiculous, the conflict of interest, as well as then, of course, wanting to look at their own political career, their own political party, and saying, how can I cement our future over the next decade to make sure our agenda can be passed? But you don't have to have politicians draw the lines. It is up to the state to decide, in your state constitution, aka the voters, to decide how these lines are drawn. So in Michigan, we decided to create an independent citizens redistricting commission, where there would be Democrats, Republicans, and independents who weren't involved in politics. They weren't political office holders. They were just everyday voters who would come together and draw these lines. The next part is that criteria I was talking about, and I actually have some slides on that. Criteria is how are the people who need to be drawing the lines, how are they supposed to do that? And actually, like, as you guys think about, like, what do you think is fair? I think it's really clear to determine what's not fair. Like when somebody is looking at their neighbor who's running against them and they're going to draw the line, like not include them in their house. That seems unfair. Trying to purposely make sure that your party has more control rather than the other, that kind of seems unfair. But what does fairness look like? So here's some examples of criteria, and I'm happy if anybody has a question on a specific one, I'm happy to go into more detail on it. But basically, how can we make sure that this geography is kept together. In some states, Michigan does not have a lot of mountains, but we have Great Lakes. And so there might be geographic features like mountains, like rivers, like lakes, where people who live around those have a strong interest together, or where they can actually travel to other parts of the state. Some states keep that geography as one of the ways that they look at redistricting. Existing political boundaries is a good example of one, where your city's boundaries are, where your school district's boundaries are. A lot of times with gerrymandering, they don't take any of that into account. If you're in a more rural part of our country, maybe your county government is what provides a lot of your services. They might just go right through the county, so that in case there's a snow emergency, you have to actually be contacting 3 or 4 representatives, hoping any of them will care about you and the services that you need. So looking at those existing political boundaries can be a great example of criteria. You can actually make gerrymandering illegal. You can say that these maps can't provide an advantage or a disadvantage to any political party or any individual candidate, which is exciting. We need a federal law that does that, but right now we don't have that. So you can pass it at the local level. You can make it so that your maps have to look at being competitive, meaning that a Democrat or a Republican, or if you have a strong independent or third party, that you have to have as close equal of a chance in certain parts of the state of winning as the other folks. Another way to try and make it so that redistricting doesn't happen. And here's a list of some other ones. And then looking at that third criteria that I had mentioned, or third thing to pay attention to, was just how the process happens. So making sure that there's public meetings that people have to go to, making sure that the demographic data that the map drawers are using is made publicly available. In the age of the internet, we should be able to recreate those maps. So they should be able to say, here's the criteria we followed, here's the data we use. Now you can create the same exact map. That wasn't necessarily the case a couple decades ago, but right now it is, and that's an extra check and balance to make sure that people are doing what they say they are. You can make it so that the legislature can't hide the information from you that they're using. You can limit the type of data, saying they can't use past election data to inform the way that these maps are drawn. All those are different examples of that. And so in Michigan, I'll just skip ahead really quick. There we go. After my Facebook post, we used this ballot initiative process. We had to gather 428,000 signatures to put this on the ballot. The people of Michigan voted to say yes. Basically, we have this independent commission that has strict criteria, including making sure that communities have to be heard. This commission's required to actually go and hold 10 meetings before they can even start drawing the maps. And then as the maps are introduced, the public get to comment on them again, and they have to go back around the state. We made it so that everything was transparent, so we could follow the data, everything like that. And it's happening right now. It's really cool. If anybody is really interested, the Michigan Secretary of State website has, they've got social media, so you can look at their meetings. They post all of the findings that they have all on the website. And what's really cool is they can't have any meetings without the public. So you can hear every single decision they're making, from how many meetings should they hold to why are they going to hire this legal team over this legal team. Although some of the decisions I don't think I would have made the same way, what's been really exciting is the people who decided they wanted to throw their hat in the ring to be on this commission. They had to submit an essay as part of that, and every single one, and there were just under 10,000 applications. They all talked about wanting to do their civic duty, wanting to make sure that people could actually trust this system again, wanting to learn more about the process and be able to make sure their community's voice could be heard for the first time ever. And so it's been really exciting to see how that's going. And I think there's so much distrust in government right now in general that creating a new process for something that's so fundamental, the basic lines of who is going to be able to vote together in order to get representation, making sure that that doesn't have corruption in it, that has a way for people to actually participate and be a part of the process beyond just voting, getting to actually go out and show up to this meeting and saying, hey, here's who I am, here's where I live, here's the kind of representation I want, and having that be mandated in our Constitution, that that has to happen. I think it's been really exciting, even though we're in this pandemic, there's been really high participation. It's been really cool because I think a lot of people were more ready to use, especially online public comment and things like that. And so I think in general, it's been very exciting to see. And I do think that it's working pretty well. And I can't remember what the next question is, Karen, but I think we wanted to do an exercise of being able to show kind of how gerrymandering works.
Yes, exactly.
All
Thank you,
right.
Katie.
This will be the slightly more interactive piece. Let me pop up my screen one more time. So we're going to make an imaginary country. Don't look at the answers. Our imaginary country, I don't know, maybe it's like called John Deere Land, since I used yellow and green. There's their logo. But basically, I want all of you guys to put yourselves in the shoes of being a map drawer. And our country, or our state, I should say, has 49 people who live in it. 7 times 7 is 49. So we're going to have 7 districts with 7 people in it each. And as you can see, we have roughly the same number of people who are in each, or who vote different ways and who will most likely continue to vote these ways. We have 24 people who vote green and 25 people who vote yellow. And so if we needed 7 districts with 7 voters in it each, I would love, you can either just raise your hand or just unmute, but if this was a fair process sticking to our democratic republic principles, how many districts do you think should go for green and how many do you think should go for yellow? And there's no wrong answers. I just want to. 7 total.
Katie, do you want people to put the answer in the chat?
Yeah, you can put it in the chat or you can unmute and say it. Mike said 4 yellow, 3 green. Anybody else? Or if you like that answer, you can do a thumbs up. Yeah, I got another 4 yellow, 3 green. Okay, I would agree. If you're thinking that, really it should be half and half, but because there's 7 districts, probably the one that should have 4 should be yellow because they have more voters that go that way, and probably, 3, that would make sense. So here's an example of how you could draw the maps. I know the yellow is a little hard to see, so I apologize, but again, there's 7. The districts are relatively close to each other. Those people probably live in the same city. They live in the same part of the state. Their kids go to the same school. You've got, some green, some yellow, but probably when decisions are being made, when they're being argued at John Deere headquarters, you've got a good mix of both green and yellow ideas, and they have to work together in order to pass. Okay, so let's now say if we were the green politicians. So green doesn't want to have less seats than yellow. Green wants as many seats as possible. And you again had 7 districts with 7 voters. Any ideas for how you might start wanting to make sure that you have the more districts than yellow? Any strategies or ideas on how you can do that? Again, no wrong answers. Feel free to unmute. Any ideas?
If they were to make one district, like kind of sacrifice one district to be totally yellow, and then try to make the others as green as possible?
Yes, Elaine, great. Yes, that is called packing. So green politicians would probably say, okay, you know what? We know that since this is basically a 50-50 country or state, we aren't going to get all of the seats, and that's okay. but how do we pack in as many of the yellow type of voters so we don't have to worry about those voters in other districts that could be more green? And so they are going to shove, again, as many of those voters as possible in one place. It's called packing. The actual word, only if you're a redistricting nerd do you really need to know, but they're going to do that. And then they're going to look at the rest of the state, and they're probably going to try and figure out, okay, how do we then spread as many of our green voters out so that we have a majority, even if it's a slim majority, in as many other districts as possible. And so if they do that, making sure that there's at least 4, and as you can see in this example, I know it'll take a second now, but there's no more than 4 green voters in all the rest of the district. You took a map that, if drawn fairly, would have actually had, what was it? 3, where was it? Yes, would have had 3 seats for green and actually given them a majority, 6 seats to only 1 seat to yellow.
Wow.
And they have less voters than the yellow does. And of course, when you think about, okay, putting this in a real world scenario, we're passing laws, you now no longer need to even listen to yellow voters, even though there's more of them in your state, because you can pass everything with a supermajority based on how you just drew these lines. These lines even don't look that funky. That's another thing. Gerrymandering, usually people just look at how crazy the lines are drawn. It doesn't always even have to be the case. But when you start looking at the math and you start only looking at how can we draw this for our advantage, that's where things can go awry. So if we're doing yellow politicians, you would do the same exact thing. You would start with, okay, how do we eliminate as many green voters as possible so that we don't have to deal with them in our district? And then how can we make sure that we put enough voters that are yellow into all of the other seats to guarantee that we're going to win it? So again, the same exact map. We haven't changed where anybody lives. We haven't changed how many voters are voting one way or the other. And also then have 6 yellow seats and only 1 green. And again, the yellow politicians then don't even have to bother listening to the green politicians for what they say or what kind of rules they want to be implemented. And as you can see, kind of towards the bottom of this, some of the lines do get more crazy with the yellow example just because of where they live geographically. But in redistricting, you'll even see there's an example in North Carolina where they actually went skinnier than the freeway, followed the freeway down like 70 miles or something, and then started going bigger again to grab more constituents in a different place. So technically every part of the map touched, because you can't have a map that doesn't touch all the places, but nobody actually lived there where it was touching. All trying to benefit themselves and not actually thinking about the practicality of representation, like what the people at the very top of this state and the very bottom of the state have in common might not be nearly as much. The other thing is for candidates who might not have as much money as other candidates who tend to be either more diverse or younger candidates who are running for office. If they have to travel that entire district all of the time, it can make being a politician really hard to even be able to meet with your constituents that way. Here's some real life examples of that. So I chose one that's been gerrymandered by Republicans and one that's been gerrymandered by Democrats. So in Michigan in 2016, 48% of the state voted for Republicans, 47% of the state voted for Democrats. We have 14 congressional districts. This should have been a 7-7 map or maybe an 8-6 map. I'm gonna have to do a lot of math today. But in reality, we had a 9-5 map. And then in Maryland, which is gerrymandered by the Democrats, really it should have, they have, I think, 8 representatives. It should have been 3 to 5 with 35% of the vote for Republicans, but instead they have 1 representative who's a Republican and the rest were Democrats. And some of their representatives in the state are actually quoted saying the Republicans are lucky we even gave them 1 seat when asked about their gerrymandering.
Katie, listen, I'm gonna have you stop here because we have a few questions from our wonderful audience, and I want to make sure that they get a chance to ask you. Andrew Waldrop, I hope I said that right. Would you like to ask your question to Katie?
Sure. I'm most concerned we have a city that has a bunch of open land. And we currently have 5 districts for 5 city council members. We're going through the redistricting process now. And what I'm curious about is how the population growth affects how you draw these district lines, when in our case, 20,000 new homes are being built in one section of the city, and the other parts of the city will not be having any growth.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I actually, where I live, they haven't changed the redistricting process in over 100 years. Our city has like quadrupled in size in the last 100 years. It looks so different. And one of the things I would encourage, if there's any space to the city commission to think about, would be, is the number of representatives we have the right number still? So does it seem like, and I don't know what the total number is, but let's say it's 1,000 residents per one city council member. You know, if that is now 1,500, basically meaning that, like, you know, by 0.5, it's increased. How much does the city council get a stipend? Like, who can run? What are people going to really feel like they know who this person is and be able to effectively use the government in order to get representation? And so starting with looking at that, like, is our total number the right number? And then one of the other things you probably want to look at is that census data, looking at demographics, looking at especially economic income, where are the poorer parts of the city, where are the rich parts of the city, as well as probably racial diversity. If there's any other problems the city's been facing, maybe the sewers are overflowing or something like that. Those are all like problems that happen near me. So I know other states it's probably like, oh, we don't have enough water. But, you know, what are some of those issues? And is there any data on that you can look at and kind of see, like, okay, based on the current maps that we've had, who hasn't been being serviced? So what we saw in Grand Rapids, where I live, is that there's a zip code, the poorest zip code in our city, has no one representing it.
Wow.
And every other zip code had at least one, if not 2 representatives that were representing those parts of the state. And so we were kind of looking at, like, how is that? And this is being the poorer part of the state over the last 10 years and having 0 representation, they've only gotten further and further behind, rather than making sure that somebody's advocating for the people who live there, even though technically they're represented by somebody else, but that person lives actually in the opposite end of the city. So by looking at kind of those demographics and the issues over the past 10 years, that's where I would kind of start. And by looking at, like, who are the, how many people per person are being represented. And does that seem effective? Also, if your city is shrinking, you know, you might have too many. You might have like 20 city council members for only 5,000 people. You know, more power to you if you want to pay for it, but it might not be necessary to still get effective government.
Thank you, Katie. We actually had one more person that had Ernie.
Karen,
Ernie had a couple of questions. Oh, I'm sorry.
Karen, hold on 1 second, because I wanted to tell Katie that there is that last question, but it's similar to some conversation in the chat. Mike from Virginia has been chatting about a commission that they have in Virginia, but unfortunately it seems like that there are political legislators are on the commission, and it's a mess. So now, go ahead. I'm sorry, Karen, to interrupt you there.
So Ernie actually had 2 questions. Ernie, do you want to go ahead and ask those?
Ernie, you need to unmute. Ernie, oh dear, how do we get to him? Ernie. Unmute.
Sarah, maybe you could ask, I think if you're a host, you can prompt to unmute.
Oh, there you go.
I unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we got
We
it.
got it.
All right. Yeah, I had 2 questions, Katie. One was regarding your citizen committee and how it's made up by political alignment. How many members are on that committee? What's their alignment? And do you feel that, or what will it take for their recommendations to be followed?
Yeah, great question. So there's 13 members on our commission. The reason we chose 13 is we saw that in some states, like in Arizona, they have a 5-member commission, and that was really kind of too small. You saw a lot of political alliances. I mean, it's still great. It's better than just politicians drawing it, but really they ran into issues based on voting. We saw in some other places that if the commission was too big, not enough of them actually can participate in the process with how much time that they have. And so kind of just landed on, we wanted an odd numbers for voting purposes. And on it, we have 4 people who've identified as the majority and the minority party. So right now that's Democrat and Republicans. You know, if in the future the Whig party makes a big comeback, you know, it'd have to be them, but 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and then 5 independent or unaffiliated voters, or they could be affiliated with a minor party. So in Michigan, the Libertarian Party has been kind of on the rise. They don't have any representatives, but a lot of voters identify that way. So you could apply to be one of those 5. And one of the key things that I think is important to think about is you can also change some of the dynamics like around voting. So for any map to be adopted, they actually need 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and 3 independents to all agree, or it can't be finalized. So thinking about that kind of stuff as well. The great part about us passing a constitutional amendment is now if you go to the Michigan Constitution, this is law. And just like our federal constitution, that's kind of the lay of the land. It stops there and it makes it really black and white. If somebody violates the Constitution, it is illegal. What our problem has been in the past is that we didn't have it really in the Constitution, the criteria. And so our legislature would say, yeah, we're following it. But if anybody brought a lawsuit, the law was really gray and you didn't have kind of that black and white, yes, this is illegal, no, it's not illegal. And so our commission, although they have to listen to people, part of our criteria is they have to actually hear from people in those communities and take their input into account to say like whether city A should be put with city B or city A should be put with city C. And so they'll have still some judgment calls to make there, but they really should be following that, what we wrote in the Constitution for the criteria in order to make sure that the maps can be done fairly. And we went around the state and we held 33 town halls in 33 days. We have 14 congressional districts. We went to each one at least twice. And we asked people, you know, how do you think the map should be drawn? What would fair look like? And we, you know, experimented and we tried using different criteria for people to be able to see, do they like that? Don't they like it? And that's how our criteria was designed.
Okay, before we lose anybody else, I want to make sure we get our trivia question in and somebody in our audience can win a prize from our wonderful People store, which you should all go to. Remember, it's thepeople.org. Check out the website. It's always evolving. I'm going to throw it over to Sarah now. Sarah is the people in the little box there, and she is going to ask you the trivia question and talk a little bit about our meeting that's going to follow this. Sarah? Uh-oh. Sarah?
I am here. I am here.
There she is.
Sorry. All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. So our trivia question for tonight, I was waiting back to the presentation, is...
Hold on one second. Everybody, put your answer into the chat. And the first person who has the right answer in the chat is going to win. Okay, wanted to clear that up.
Actually, I have 2 questions written, so I don't know if there was a decision made. Elena, if you've got a final say on which of the questions was to be the trivia question?
Not the one about Massachusetts, the other one.
Okay. Looks like we're asking where rather does the name gerrymandering come from? Where do we get the term gerrymandering? Like being in school. That's it. All right. Looks like Mike was the first one to get, Mike Rakowski was the first one to get it in the chat there.
Trivia king.
We had some really good listeners tonight, that's for sure.
Yeah,
feel
for
bad.
sure.
Wait a minute, time out. We got a problem because poor Ernie didn't realize I had direct messaged him. So when he wrote, he didn't write to everyone. It just came to me, and he had the answer, but it didn't go to everyone. I feel badly. I had to say that.
We
Okay,
can split
Ernie.
it. We'll give you both a prize. It'll be
Okay.
fine.
Good idea.
Yes, it'll be good.
I just want to make sure that we are fair. We have fair elections here.
Yeah,
Katie, you
I
wanted
did.
to add something, Katie?
Yeah, I did want to, there are two things. So the census got delayed because of the pandemic, so I want to address that. And then we actually have our redistricting intern on, Will, and there's this really easy tool, well, somewhat easy, and we can help you if it's not easy, where you can draw your own map. And, you know, it's kind of hard to envision, like, how would I draw the maps differently? But once you start actually looking at a map of your city, and you have to figure out, like, okay, how do we make sure that at least 300,000 people are represented here for our state house district? You know, you start thinking about, like, well, what other city would I say does business with our city? Or maybe you're part of a certain community. Like, I was a student in college, and our college was actually in 3 different house districts. So if you wanted to talk to anybody about a campus issue, you had to try and talk to 3 different representatives, hoping any of them would listen to you. So those kinds of things might start coming to mind, or if you've had a problem recently, or even being able to look at your school districts, if you have kids in school and or grandkids or whatever, and you're kind of like, well, we have the largest school district in the state, yet again, there's 4 people who represent it, especially over COVID. I know that at least in Michigan, a lot of education decisions have being made. So anyways, I'll let Will kind of show that and pop in the chat the link, and we can send it in a follow-up email too, but so that you can try and draw your own maps. Because once you do that, it can actually send it directly to your representatives, and or you can email your representatives and say, like, hey, here's what I thought of when I was drawing these maps, and here's my 2 cents. Because if we don't participate, if we don't try participating with either an independent commission or a semi-independent commission like in Virginia, or with your actual representatives, even if they are still the ones drawing the lines, if we don't participate at all, then somebody else is going to make all of those decisions. And it is shown that even if you live in a state without an independent commission, representatives, more times than not, if you have a really specific example and you can point to something where you aren't getting representation, they will actually listen to you, and they might still gerrymander the whole state, but your district might be a little bit more fair. So I just wanted to mention the census had to kind of get redone for a couple different reasons. Of course, Democrats and Republicans don't agree, so there's a bunch of like drama that I can get more into. Basically, the important part is there was drama, and over what questions can be asked and who can ask them and who can they be asked of. And then funding was an issue. And then with the pandemic, a lot of people, they had to change. Traditionally, the census has relied a lot on in-person canvassing, and that was a big struggle over this last year. And so the census data normally actually comes out way earlier, like in January, and it actually just came out last week, and some of the final sets of data are coming out today and tomorrow. And so with that, a lot of states actually missed their deadline for when they were supposed to have these lines drawn. And as I mentioned in the very beginning, one of the very few federally mandated rules is that you have to use census data in order for these maps to be legitimate. So you see a lot of kind of politics going on at the local level, where depending on how the election looks or who's going to draw the lines, you have some representatives saying, hey, let's just wait to draw the lines. There's no way we could use the data this quickly. Let's hold the next election first, and then those people can draw the lines. Or you have other people saying, yep, let's just, we don't have any time for public comment. We've just got to pass this as quickly as possible. And sorry, public, but we'll do our best. And that's one of the reasons I would extra encourage you that if you haven't looked into your redistricting process and what that might look like, that you may want to. We're going to send the PowerPoint I was showing after this, but one of the slides kind of has the like, what can you be doing to advocate for more fair lines? And really it's figure out how your lines are drawn, figure out what the actual process is, and then advocate for any changes in the process that you want to see, whether that's mandatory public meetings or data or wanting to increase the number of seats that are being used. And then the last is really actually go and submit and talk about what do you want representation to look like. So Will, if I can pass it over to you to kind of show Redistrictor.
Will is you too, Katie. Will has.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should be able to edit your name if you want, if you click on the three dots, Will. on
Oh,
your
I
name.
like the fact
Oh
that
yeah,
it
here
is
we
now
go.
split.
But if you want to stay me, it's cool.
All right, there we go. So hi everybody, I'm Will. I've been the redistricting intern with the people this past summer. And so I'm going to show you how to use Districtor. And so I'll type in the link to the website in the chat below, but you don't have to go on because I'll be screen sharing my screen to give so you guys can see, and it'll be easier for you just looking at my screen than going back and forth between your screen and my screen. Okay, so can everybody see my screen here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this website is called districtor.org, and it helps us create maps of communities of interests that you can then send to your state legislators, like Katie was saying, in order to help give your input on the redistricting process in your state. So I'm going to go through step by step how to use it, and I'll ask for a volunteer to take me through what they would like to see their community of interest look like, and then hopefully you guys will be able to see what I do, and I'll go step by step as I do it, and then you guys will be able to do it on your own as well. So the first step when we get to the Districtor website is to go to the link up here that says jump to the map. And here you can choose from any state in the country in order to draw your communities. So does anybody want to volunteer to run everyone through their communities and to show me where you want your communities of interest to be drawn? Any volunteers? You can just unmute and call out if you want to.
Why don't you do Virginia? Because they seem to be having some issues down there about getting it right.
Virginia, sure.
Yeah.
All right. So we're gonna go here in Virginia. Click on Virginia in the map. And so since we're gonna be drawing communities of interest, we're going to go here. Click on the Draw Communities box right here. And there are two options where you can draw a community out of, they call it block groups, and another where you can identify a community built out of precincts. And so for our purpose, we're going to draw our communities out of block groups.
And the difference for everybody is the block groups are a little bit bigger. So especially if you don't know a lot of the details, individual streets, that kind of thing, it's kind of an easier way to zoom in on where you're talking about.
Okay, and then before we get into the nitty gritty of the map, I'll just show you the different tools that Districtor has that you will need to use in order to map your communities. So first, in the top right hand corner over here where my mouse is circling, you have these 4 circles. The first hand is just to, pan around on the screen and that sort of thing. Then to zoom, it's just the normal zoom on your camera, or plus minus out here. The paintbrush here is what you're going to use to actually draw your communities. So I'll just show you quickly how it works. You can, once we identify the community that we want to map, you will click on the paintbrush and it'll give you the option to color it in like that. All you do is click down and there you have it. And if you make a mistake or something, you can just click on the eraser here and it'll get rid of any drawings you draw. And then the magnifying glass is not something we really need to worry about, but I'll get to more of that stuff in a minute. Okay. So does anybody want to volunteer to run us through their community in Virginia? All you will have to do is kind of give me a city that we center ourselves around, and then kind of just show the borders of your community. Your community of interest can be really small. It can be, you know, a couple tens of thousands of people, or it can be a population that goes up to, you know, whatever the amount in a congressional district is in the state of Virginia. So it's really up to you, and it's just a way for
Jimmy, I don't know if you have this kind of information. I'm taking it you are from Virginia. I see Mike left, but would you like to suggest something?
I'm sorry to say that I don't understand that process enough to want to jump in here.
Okay. Yeah,
I'm willing to give, I've got some numbers and what have you. So if you want to drop down to the peninsula of Florida, I'd be happy to participate.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure, that'll work. So I'll just go back and then we'll go into Florida here. All right, I'm still same thing. Identify the community out of block groups. And here we are. Okay.
So Ernie, if you want to start with the city you live in, usually you can build out from there.
Yep, I'll just
All right.
put in the city in the top.
We're on. Okay, you want me to do that, or will you do that, Will?
I'll do that. If you just want to name your
Okay,
city,
okay, Largo, Largo.
All right, here we go. So you guys can see it. Type it in the search bar in the top left, and it'll come up here, the city or
Largo Bar and Grill.
Yep, it gives very specific location, so you can really center yourself around anything that you want. So I'll just
All
click
right, let's
on.
meet at the Largo Bar and Grill.
Well, that's what you want your district to be, from Largo all the way down to Miami, so it gets the Largo Bar and Grill, right?
Well,
That's not one of my watering holes.
so is this about right?
Nope, that's,
Oh, you clicked on the bar and
No.
grill, Will.
you clicked on,
Do you want?
you're down,
You just
you're
want?
down in Dade County now.
You want the city of Largo right over here?
Right.
Okay.
There you go. There you go. Okay.
All right. And so.
Okay. As a matter of fact, where that little cursor is almost exactly where I reside.
Oh, perfect. So if you want, when you're mapping, what you can do is down here in the bottom right, it has this, excuse me, little thing called important places. So you can click on that, which you can see it activates. So I can drop a pin if for this
Just
purpose,
to the bottom of that.
the blue pin is in the
Just to the
perfect
bottom.
spot. But
Right
if
there, right there. Yep.
right, if the blue pin's not in the perfect spot, you can drop this and you can see there's a little red dot right here. And now we have a new place and we can call it Ernie's home.
Can you see my cursor on there?
No.
All right, if you went exactly east to the right on a straight line, you'll see a green area.
Yes.
And in the upper right-hand corner of that green area, you see that little three-fingered lake.
Yep.
That's right where you just had the hand, is where I live. Just south of, no, out of the water.
Oh, yep. Perfect. So,
All right, this building just south of that, the big, that's it, right there. You
all
hit it.
right. So, okay, so I'll
That's-
drop a new,
that's
I'll
my-
drop a new one right there. And
That's my community.
we'll call that place Ernie's home. So that's where we know we're going to center our community around.
Okay,
All right. And so then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move over to the paintbrush so we can start actually mapping the community. And Ernie, I'll just have you tell me what areas to color in and which areas you don't think are part of your community. And
Will, do you want to show some
Okay,
of the existing boundaries that it can add to see if maybe he wants to?
sure.
like the
So,
precinct.
so one way
Can you,
can here, I'll just
Okay.
one way you can go through and see easily some of the existing boundaries is if you go here to data layers, you can show county boundaries, which is already showing, or you can, hold on, let me just, see, this has, this will tell, once we actually draw a community, this will give us some demographic breakdowns. You know what? This certain states, if you're going to be drawing, you can have different types of boundaries show, like certain municipalities, but I've never worked with Florida before on this software, so I guess Florida doesn't have that. For example, when we mapped Michigan, we could see the different municipality boundaries, but I guess we'll just have to work with Ernie here, and he'll be our guide for the whole way.
does this program block out precincts, Will?
Does it block out
Voting
voting
precinct?
Well, I think Katie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it only allows you to draw in certain block groups. So for example, here my brush size on the paintbrush is 1. So this is the smallest that I can draw. And I think that so this would have to all be in the same community. And I think that is where the precincts are, because everybody in the precinct has to be in the same community for the purposes of
Voting block, yeah. For some states where it all comes down to too, because each of our states handles elections differently, whether they make their data publicly available or in an easy format to put into a computer program is up to that state. And so on some of the other states, you have the option to either do a block group, which is larger, or the precincts. But I don't think Florida had that. I think Will had to choose voting block. That might have to be a little bigger, Ernie.
Right. So now that we are centered around this red dot being your home, you want to take us through your community. So I guess first we'll obviously start with this little area that contains where you live. So we'll color that. And why don't you take us through? Should I just start to color around, and is this what you consider that area?
Well, what are we looking for by moving around to the different areas?
So
What specifics?
right. So it's really how you define your community. It's really a personal thing. Some examples of what people will use are shared policy concerns that affect the group of people that will affect you and others around you. If you have a shared culture in your city that's very specific to a certain area, then you would want that to all be in the same community together. If you live in a city that's kind of the economic hub of a certain area, then you would want that area to all be in the same community. So however you define your community is up to you, but those are just some ways that people may define their
I
community.
put it in the chat too, some different definitions, but you know, if you wanted to say, hey, I know that I want the whole city of Largo, we could look at doing that. That's one way that I know I started. Or for us, it was kind of, I live in East Grand Rapids, but there's also Grand Rapids, and we, you know, our water and like our different utilities come from Grand Rapids. So we started with doing the whole city of Grand Rapids and then the city of East Grand Rapids too. And I do know this is kind of going into the volunteer portion too. So if, just if anybody needs to go, please feel free. We've loved having you, but this is kind of for our volunteering opportunities. One of the key things we're trying to do is actually train people on this software so that they can help either organizations. So like the NAACP in Virginia or something, we'll actually work with them and provide them a will so that they can go and map out their community and what they want to submit. Or if there's just individuals who are not really sure about the technology and want to use it. So this is an example of one of the ways we're trying to help people across the country be able to participate in their redistricting process.
Is there a master index of the information that can be gleaned from this app?
There are different, I don't know what you mean by master index, but there are things
An index. Yeah, an index that tells us what we can find by using the app.
You know, I'm not actually sure about that. I would suggest kind of looking around. For example, using this software, if you go over to the evaluation tab over here, you can see how in this area that I've drawn in blue, which is community 1 right now, which you can name whatever you want, it tells you the total number of people that are in that community, and it gives you demographic breakdowns. You can look into the voting age population and homeowners or renters. So it gives you different options and to look at. This demographic breakdown is, I believe, the same for every state. And then I think some of the stuff like the homeowner or renter may be state specific.
And then when you go to click on your state, Ernie, Will kind of went through this quickly, but it'll kind of give you a couple options on your actual state's page as well. Redistrictor is one of the examples of the software. There's actually about 3 or 4 different ones. We've been working with a group out of Wisconsin. So this is the one that they're using, but I could send you a list of a couple of the different options to see if one of the other ones might have more information.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
So for the purposes of building Ernie's community, an easy way to kind of just start would be to take your brush and just kind of color in a lot of the areas out right next to your city. So if Largo's right here and Ernie obviously considered himself a member of the Largo community, an easy way to kind of just start for you may be to color in a lot of the areas here. And
you can try Googling like Largo on Google Maps, and it should pull up the city boundary for what's included in that. You could kind of look at that and see.
Right, so the Largo Medical Center here, I would think is probably part of that community. So that is just one easy way to kind of start. And then if we look and we kind of zoom out, we can see what we've drawn so far. And then we can adjust using, draw more, adjust using the eraser. So here, Ernie, would you consider Bel Air to be in the same community as Largo? Maybe we would go up here and we would color this in, or if it's not part of the same community, we would leave that blank. So what do you
Katie, do you want to explain some of the like you did explain that some people that you are helping, is that the volunteer opportunities you're talking about? that the people has is that we're going to be helping different communities or maybe different organizations draw out what would be their community that they don't want split out or something. Like,
yeah, so one of the opportunities we have is to get trained on this software to be able to help people. We are also looking for somebody who likes social media, who can help the campaign in South Dakota with their social media pieces. We're creating a redistricting information hub on our website. So that Will has done a really great beginning to. And so if you like doing research or like thinking about graphics or website content, we could use you there as well.
great.
And so Ernie, I mean, is there anything that comes to mind that over the last 10 years has been a community issue that you feel like hasn't really been addressed?
No, our community is probably one of the most stable. We're a crossroads of our county. We're a bedroom community, and things don't change a heck of a lot. The growth occurs around us, and the problems are to the east here, to the left of that map, which is the beach communities. And they're the ones that have been having the problems. So my community, which is one reason I'm living here, is and has been historically a pretty stable community.
Yeah, and so one example might be that the beach community really has a lot more in commons with themselves, so you may not want them included, but sorry, did you say you're a crossroads at your county? Like you're in the middle of it? Is that what that means? Or in between counties?
Yeah, we're right square in the center of it.
So county line was one of the existing political boundaries it shows, I believe. And that might be an example too, where we could start with, let's fill in the whole county and see what population number that is. Do we have it chosen? Oh no, we gotta choose it. There we go.
Yeah. So this is your county boundary.
Right.
You can see it's you can tell when you zoom out.
Right.
So Will, why don't you start choosing the whole county and let's see what kind of population that gives us.
All right, let's do that.
Yeah, it should be close to 1 million.
Yeah, so that's probably a little too big for a state house is like, I need to look at after the new census, it was like around 700,000. So what you might want to do then is, as you're thinking about like, okay, well, who would make sense to be in a different, if you wanted to do congressional district. Now for your state house or your state senate, I don't know Florida's off the top of my head, but what you want to do is take your total state population and then divide it by however many seats there are. And then we could kind of get that population number to be able to then try and keep adjusting these numbers to figure out, okay, well, so for my state senate district, I would want this. For my state house district, I would want this. But if you can go to the numbers, Will, to help us see. So you're right, Ernie, right under 900, right under 1 million. So if we were going to get rid of those 200,000 more people for a congressional seat, if you feel like the county is an important unit of government that wants to stay together, I mean, where do you think there's a community that has more in common outside of this county?
Let's see, this county, it would, in common would be the one to the right. That's Hillsborough County, where Tampa is located.
And do you think Tampa has more in common with kind of like the communities that are right over the bridge or more towards East Lake in the north?
Probably East Lake in the north, Temple Terrace, Del Rio, Lutz, that north part of that county.
All right. Yeah, so then maybe if you're drawing if you want to draw your community, maybe you would take the East Lake area, that area that you said may have more in common with the Tampa area, and take that out of your community. So it would, because it has more in common with the other community. So we could just erase part of this from your community.
Another example, depending on what people's different industries are. So like in California, there's like the fancy grape growers and then there's the like cheaper grape growers. And when they were trying to put together testimony, they looked at where their wineries were. And the fancy grape growers had different needs than the less fancy, the generic, I don't know, grape growers. And so they based a map based off of their wineries being able to show the commission. And then with the comment that they submitted to the commission, they explained like, hey, here's how we feel like our industry is being ignored. Here's the reason that we feel like we have shared representation. You know, the same natural disasters impact each of us, blah, 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 blah. And they submitted testimony that way. So, you know, for something individually, you might be better off using a smaller population. So for your state house or your state senate, if you don't have a lot of strong opinions, but you definitely know at least your immediate community. So like I was explaining, the city of Grand Rapids, we have like 6 sister cities that all of like, we all use the same trash, the same water, all of that. Yet right now those cities are drawn, they were gerrymandered into 3 different congressional districts. And so one of the top things you heard when people were giving testimony from our community was, we just want those 6 cities together. And that is actually just about a congressional seat. It wasn't more complicated than that. It was like, we do commerce together. People live in one city yet work in another. Like there's a lot of interest in shared resources and concern with how these populations are growing, with how the education systems are. And that's kind of where that piece was. And those are the kinds of things that, you know, if you wanted to do a larger city that was a congressional district, you know, Ernie, maybe you have a friend who's up in Clearwater, I don't know, and you could kind of call them and ask their opinion on what are you seeing? Or you don't have to draw an entire district in order to submit it as testimony. So even if you were just like, I'm just going to look at Largo and I'm just going to look at the surrounding cities right here, and what I really feel like we all have shared interests, whether it's cultural, economic, whatever that might be. And you can just submit that and let your representative know that, like, hey, whatever the districts are, let's make sure these communities stay together because, you know, Ernie, I think one of the points you were just saying is if we've had a stable, it's working for us, all of us being together. You know, we've had stability in our part of the state, in our community, and we want to keep it that way, whatever that is.
Well, I'll just comment that Clearwater is one of the most beautiful beaches anywhere. If I was in the district, I'd want to keep it beautiful white sands.
You're still allowed to visit, even if you're not this.
Okay.
But the representative might want it for that reason, Mike. Yeah. And so our population's just around 700,000. So, and I think actually because our country grew, I do think that they're higher now. I need to look up the number I meant beforehand. So you'd probably be good if you wanted to submit this as a congressional map. And so Will, for just sake of example, could you just show how you save this and how you could send it? Sorry, hiccups.
Yes. So what you would do now, if you're at the point where you're comfortable with what your community is you'll go back over here and we're just going to name this. We can name this like Largo and surrounding area as the name of your community. You can describe the community if you want to. That's all up to you. And so what you're going to do at this point is just all you have to do is go up here and click this little save button. And so what it'll do is it'll give you a URL right here. And so if we copy that, so I copied it to my clipboard right here and I can put it in the chat. Should I put it in the chat for everybody?
Yeah, might as well.
Okay.
At least for Ernie.
Right. So I'll put it in the chat. So all this link is it's going to bring you to the page that looks exactly like this. It's going to bring you to this community that we've just drawn. And so then what you can do is different states do it differently, but some states have a portal where you can submit your maps to the legislature. Other states, you can just contact your legislators directly through email, and you can copy in this link of your map and tell your legislators that you would like this to be considered as all being part of the same congressional district when the new maps are drawn. later this year for
You
next.
can also print it too if you wanted to do in-person testimony, if you want to drive to your capital, or if your legislature or independent commission is driving around the state, you can go and physically hand it over. If you wanted to send them an email with it, you could. It's also another way you could post it on social media and say, hey, I was thinking about congressional districts. What if ours looked like this instead? And you could even show a picture of what the current district is next to this one and get other people's comments on it. But the important part is being able to provide it. And if you were to send it in an email to your representative, the biggest thing I would just say is you have to, just a map on its own doesn't provide enough context. So you do want to kind of write why. And so you could say like, I really feel like our county has a strong form of government, should be kept together, blah, 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 Ernie, or whatever other pieces you wanted to do. I know we were just doing a quick example here, but our county should be kept together. As congressional districts, we have a lot of similar interests. Our county government is blah, blah, blah. These states have similar interests. Here's why I'm advocating for that, and send it to your representatives. And then in most states, if you don't have some kind of commission, usually there's a House committee and a Senate committee that tend to not be as bipartisan as they should, but you can look up who are on those committees, the redistricting committee, and you would want to send it to the members on that committee as well as your own member of the House or Senate. But yeah, in regards to the people, if you want help doing this, if you're really interested in finding other people in your community or neighborhood, and you think it would be easier to have somebody kind of be listening and doing the mapping like Will was, being able to walk through that, we're happy to do that. If you are interested in maybe trying to learn this technology so you can help other folks, we'd love to have you that way too. You can type in the chat or send me a direct message in the chat if any of those are of interest. And we'll also be sending an email after this event, like I said, with PowerPoint and some other follow-up items that you could respond to that as well. And if you guys could all help me give a nice virtual round of applause or with the little emoji piece. Will's internship has concluded. This is his final test. He worked all summer for free, very hard for us. He was our first districting intern ever. We had to start from scratch to build all of our programming. So I just want to say so much, Will. Thank you for bringing the bar so high and for helping people across the country, Wisconsin, Florida, Michigan, be able to have their voices heard.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Oh, thank you. All right. And Elena and Karen, unless, I don't know if I need to say anything else, but I can pass it back over to you guys. Ernie, their decision is final. People can sue, just like you could sue against your own state maps right now. But they, even if, let's say, a lawsuit is successful, the commission will actually be the ones who have to redraw it again if they did unconstitutional.
Good.
And that's all. If anybody's interested in passing an independent commission in your state, that's another thing we can help with. But we have a lot of resources on like things to consider, much more detail. I know I provided a ton of detail tonight, but much more detailed than even that about kind of with the criteria, you even want to rank them and have the people who are drawing the lines like do one thing first, then the second, then the third. We can get into all that.
All right. Thank you, Katie. Let's hear it for Katie, everybody.
No
Thank you,
problem.
Katie. Great job.
Thank you, guys.
We probably will be holding some more of these because this is kind of anybody that joined us tonight, thank you so much. It's a tough time. It's August after the pandemic. A lot of people were going on vacation and this is just like a difficult time, but the census and redistricting is going to be going on this whole year. Katie, did you tell people where they could find out information about their own state? I know we came across that. It might be which was the website that Will found that had each of the states and what their deadlines
Princeton
were?
Gerrymandering Project, but also on our website we have, I don't know if that'll take everybody to just the redistricting part, but we have this tool called Votopedia that some of our volunteers made, which is really great. It's thepeople.org/vote-o-pedia.org. I can include that in the email too. That's not the link that I sent should bring you directly to the map, but there's a map where you can actually, if you put redistricting commission as like your top criteria, it can filter it out for you. Or Sarah, I don't know if you have the link to the report. We could pop that in the chat too.
Yeah, it was so nice to get some new people and very nice comments in the chat about how I think Margaret left, but she really appreciated how we're nonpartisan and we can have a discussion on an important issue that affects everybody, which is, you know, that's who we are.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I meant to say, I certainly said plenty, but because this only happens once every 10 years and because normally it's politicians doing the process, I mean, they don't try, there's not a lot of emphasis on people actually participating in this process, but that's really the only way to try and get it to be as less political as possible. Paying attention, calling politicians out for choosing their voters. Voters are supposed to be the ones electing their politicians. This is not supposed to be how this works. And so that's just a really important piece for, it can kind of seem like, man, I've never done this before. I've never created a map, or I've never had to think about what my community is. But like, if there was ever a time to do it, now really is, because of the amount of technology, because there's so much data on people. Like, the only thing that can stop that is people paying attention and participating. And again, if nobody participates, if nobody submits any opposite map or opposite ideas, then even if a map is going up, if a lawsuit's filed against this, then there's not a public record showing that the people even cared that it was drawn in this hyper-partisan way. And that's why we have to say, even if you don't want to draw a map, but you just want to submit a comment saying, I don't want this to, I don't want a disproportionate advantage being given to Democrats or Republicans. I just want this drawn on keeping our communities together. That at least puts something in the public record so that if somebody brings a lawsuit, it shows, hey, look, the intentions of the people of our state are this. And almost every single state constitution, if you look at Article 1, Section 1, or Article 1, Section 2 of your state constitution, almost every single one says that, the people really hold the power in this state. That the politicians should be answering to the people, that, the people have to give their explicit consent at being governed or whatever it is. So, our power really does lie both at the federal level and the state level to be a part of these decisions. Michigan's is Article 1, Section 1, all political powers. I really love it. It's like my favorite part to quote.
Ernie, you got a lot of work to have to do down there in Florida. You got a huge, I mean, that's where the ex-president is. I think all our help should be to Florida, Katie.
Yeah, well, and it's such a big state too, so it can be overwhelming sometimes as in a really big state. You look at New York City, there's 10 million people who live there alone. So you really have to get into like the specifics within that city and everything. Some of the smaller states though, some folks think like, oh, well, Montana only has 2 congressional seats. You can still gerrymander 2 seats. You can make it where maybe you would have had 1 for each party, only go to 1 party, or vice versa. So, and those local maps too. I mean, so many decisions are made at the local level. Those should matter.
You should see the way the districts are in Rhode Island. There's only 2, okay? And it makes no sense unless you realize what they did, the way my district is, you know what I mean? It makes no sense, right?
Completely, yeah. And the biggest part about that is these decisions then last for the next 10 years. So the next 10 years worth of elections are impacted by this one decision being made right now. And one of the things I think a lot about are, what about the people? There's already a lot of voter apathy, a lot of people who feel like, oh, even if I, show up to vote, it's not going to matter. Think of how many people in the next 10 years are going to be voting for the first time. And if they're voting in a district where they already feel like their vote doesn't count, or somebody's not trying to represent them, I mean, it doesn't set them up for success continuing on. When I met with my own state house member about redistricting and saying, hey, we should reform the system, he said, well, who did you vote for? That was his first question to me. And was it him or not? And if it wasn't him, he was in a gerrymandered district, so it didn't matter. He literally said, I only need to listen to the people who get me elected. And that's not what our country is supposed to be about, in my opinion.
There's a similar impact on younger voters from all these new restrictive voting laws that they're writing in the states, and they're making it, as they make it more challenging and more difficult for voters to vote, that really impacts young voters who may not have even voted before. So their first experience, they say, oh, there's nowhere I can drop it off, this and that. And the concern is if you've already voted before, you kind of know the deal. If you've never voted before, the concern is they'll say, boy, this is really complicated and I'm not sure I'm doing it right.
And
But
you
I
didn't
will
make
say,
it.
I will get in one thing, Sarah will be proud of me. One thing we're doing well as the people is we have a voting resource guide that has some very good objective sources that will take you right to the requirements in your particular precinct and tell you what the dates are, what the deadlines are, what the requirements are for ID and so on. And it's reliable, objective information. So that's something very positive, I think. And Sarah did a lot of work on that. I think that's something very positive that we can contribute, is to help people make it through the minefield, if you will.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I think it is really about that. And I think too, just relating back to the redistricting process, like making sure your community can actually have its voice heard, regardless of who you vote for, especially for like president or state senate or whatever, like those local decisions, who your community is, like matters so much more than a national party platform. Again, my own opinion, but like, how many decisions about so many things that are talked about on TV in regards to national politics actually are voted on by your local representatives? Your local representatives are looking at roads, infrastructure, education, water resources, natural disaster preparedness. So like in Florida, I think that's a great example where, you got hurricanes, all that kind of stuff. Like there are probably certain communities that really do have a lot of life or death things in common, where a line being placed in the wrong place for the next 10 years might mean that one representative responds 3 days later, which literally might make the difference to people's lives. And that's what gets lost when we only look at politics. We only look at the red and the blue when trying to draw these basic lines. And that's what I'm really excited to see, how much energy is going. We're seeing people from across the entire country who really want just something that's representative, not that's
Right.
cool. Yeah.
Right.
It's exciting.
As Ernie said, power to the people. I'm reading your chat, Ernie.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't know if there's any other questions or anything, but just want to say thanks, guys, so much to you.
Yeah.
And for
And
this.
stay tuned
Elena and
for
Karen.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah.
stay tuned for